Good afternoon, everybody, and it's wonderful to have you here to discuss what I think is a fascinating topic, as most of us wonder what the future is going to look like. And we've looked at those amazing cities that Dubai is planning and the UAE is planning, and we've even had our own president tell us that we're going to have a smart city near Johannesburg. Not quite sure when, but at least it's on the agenda. And what I have today with me are two people who really understand something about smart cities and where we're likely to be going. But let me just say something about the topic itself, right? It's one of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, adopted in 2015. And the main objective of the smart city is to create safe, secure, clean urban spaces where people can move freely, access critical services like housing, healthcare, education, and explore the economic opportunities in an inclusive environment. It's also about the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, blockchain, geospatial technology, all those new-fangled science fiction type things. But transforming a traditional city into a smart city is complex, and Africa is lagging behind. Some success stories, I think Cape Town's done pretty well. Nairobi, Port Louis in Mauritius, Abidjan in the Ivory Coast, Lagos to some extent. But we're still lagging behind our Western counterparts. And African states are under increasing pressure to develop urban environments that will support their nation's development goals. Right, but I think we need a sort of uniquely African iteration of the smart city. And I'm going to ask my panelists to give us an idea of where they think we are and where they think we're going and where they think what we should be doing. So let me first turn to Clint Higgins, who's a University of Stellenbosch alumni, got a master's in development finance. So looking at the finances of the developing world and especially of Africa, and other business qualifications, studied part-time for 9 years and is a supply chain management expert, 14 years experience. He's passionate about supply chain management, transformation, sustainable economic development, and small business development. He's been instrumental in the setup of multifaceted Department of Health facility upgrades and a supply chain management advisor to the multidisciplinary projects for the city of Cape Town. Right, Clint, take us away.
Hi, good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here this morning. I really appreciate the fact that we can have this discussion with you, Peter, today. Welcome to my fellow panelists as well. Marius, Marit, sorry, apologies. And really happy to sort of wanting to facilitate this discussion and sort of bring in my expertise around how I see the integration of SMMEs into the space of your smart city narrative. I think what we need to understand that smart cities is a concept that is aligned to where we are as a country, where we are in the world, where we are from a tech adoption perspective, but also there's this age-old narrative of rural-urban migration. And as people have migrated to cities, the narrative is cities are becoming overpopulated. There's a massive pressure on services, healthcare education, and various other public infrastructure facilities. And that's causing governments to reassess where they are. And that's really brought on this narrative of smart cities. As you said, South Africa and Africa is lagging behind our Western counterparts. And that's fundamentally because of missing the full-on technological revolution, and I think we are gearing towards that. I think the uptake of our tech infrastructure, internet access, usability is now being fully understood in South Africa, and we're now morphing into understanding the theoretical principles that will underpin smart cities. For me, a smart city will generally have to create a level of placemaking. And when I say placemaking, I think of it in a sense where, from a design perspective, we need to curate places for people to engage. In as much as we will have a smart city, there needs a level of human engagement to actually allow for the city to be active. Otherwise, people might just find themselves in their apartments, working from home, or the lack of human engagement, and that causes major psychological problems over time. So my thinking is, and my experience at the time at the V&A waterfront really allowed me to see how they curated spaces through public facilities that allowed people to converse. Because they saw people were enjoying the space, but there was no level of integration and sharing of ideologies. So what I really think the city needs to start doing is really curate it. And then from a development perspective, I also think that because of the massive inequality gap in South Africa, your designs and sort of housing facilities need to make space for an array of different people. As human beings, we have this narrative to acclimate and become better over time, and therefore we need to see success within the relevant spaces. So as a Cape Town local, I grew up on the Cape Flats, and for me the narrative was always, how do I position myself in a way to understand what the rest of the world is doing? But that needed me to move out of my current surroundings and move into Cape Town CBD. I schooled at some point in time at Cape Town High School. And when I got to Cape Town CBD, I was like, wow, this is a breath of fresh air. There's a different dynamic, people dynamics different. And that allowed me to see that there needs to be a level of integration. So Peter, for me, fundamentally, the biggest part of that infrastructure build, the smart city design needs to have a human-centered approach, right? It needs to think, what is our human-centered problem? Where are we as a country from a human perspective? Where are our people, and what are the desires of people? Because in as much as we can design a smart city, there needs to be uptake, right? So there's a new development in Pinelands in Cape Town, and they're really creating this sort of RDP housing, sort of high-end apartments, really inclusive communities. So what we see now over time in South Africa is we're curating this community narrative, but again, there's that social reform that needs to happen. We need to teach people around social behaviors, behavioral dynamics, to ensure that when we put all of these people together, there will be an inclusive drive for the same objective. I think it's fundamentally important for us that we understand that human at the center of our design approach. And I think the fact that South Africa, in as much, and Johannesburg, as you mentioned, there's a massive plan to roll out the smart city in land close to Lanseria. And that will really encompass this inclusive living. And what we want to see holistically is where a space and a place for people to work, live, and play. What that means is the sort of economic activity will also be there. People won't need to move as much. When people aren't required to move as much, they won't drive as much. That would lessen carbon emissions from a driving perspective. And that would have a huge financial incentive for the communities they live in, from an environmental perspective. That ties into the whole narrative of the ESG that we've just seen picking up effectively within all corporate businesses, the level of environmental, social, and governance and ethics perspective. But for me, what's going to be critical to the development of these smart cities is the gearing of SMMEs. Right. We have the theoretical principles, we have the philosophies, we have all these strategies in place, alignment to the sustainable development goals. But what I think we, in the South African context or the developing world context, lack is the level of suppliers and businesses that will be able to create and curate these cities. It's important to understand that, yes, there's this design element. The architect does this amazing design. However, if the market can't activate it from a product and sourcing perspective, how are we going to activate the entire city? So for me, there needs to be a massive level of driving small businesses to really tap into the level of sustainability and green economy to allow for these cities to be activated effectively. And that's the work we do within an organization I work in called Property Point. We develop SMMEs from a business development perspective, but to at the later stage take up these market opportunities that are being curated effectively. So for me, that's my thinking on sort of smart cities and sustainable development. But again, it's going to also challenge us to change our design, our urban design, how we curate places and spaces. And that for me is the most important thing. But for me, ultimately, as I said, there's a level of needing to integrate the SMMEs into the space, as well as a human-centered design approach. Without that, I think we won't really effectively land from African context. And I've been reading up on the sustainable city, sustainable development, and I think again I was at Lyndoch, which is the sustainable community within Stellenbosch. And what they've done is they created and curated a sustainable community that can really live off itself, but in a sustainable manner. What they did, if I can just give you an example, is if you think of aircon systems and in the main hall, they literally built the hall in a way that there was natural airflow that allowed for less impact to the environment. So I say again that a sustainable city, yes, the tech looks amazing, but I think we need to understand that the environment is critical in this role.
Right.
So that's my thoughts on the sustainable cities holistically, Peter.
Well, you've certainly already informed me a lot, because I'm kind of looking at plumping a brand new sustainable smart city. And in fact, what you're talking about is we are developing as we go along. We're developing bits of smart cities. I'm in Cape Town, and in fact, the Western Cape does seem to be well ahead of the rest of the country. I mean, if you kind of go to the Western Cape, they seem to have a lot more of these places where people meet and mix. And, you know, I mean, from Kirstenbosch to the waterfront, to some extent, it's because it's more of a tourist city, Cape Town. So people are more likely, I think, to cater for tourists seeing things. I mean, but when I look at Soweto and Johannesburg and the kind of the problems that apartheid gave us of dividing people, and I wonder how you see it. I mean, it's fine to start a new smart city at the airport, but what about the current Johannesburg, Soweto kind of mix? Is that going to be able to, are we going to be able to mix the people of Soweto with the people who live in Houghton, you know?
Yeah. So what I say, that requires a massive drive for education around people. I think the level in Johannesburg, especially, there's a level of more integration. So I don't think there'll be a difficult drive to get people to live in one space. I think people already interact in the relevant spaces socially. So now just how do they, from a sporadic perspective, from a location and regional perspective, how do they integrate? I really think that there is place. There's some developments within Johannesburg CBD, Marshalltown especially, where buildings are now being repurposed. With COVID and the narrative around people not coming to the office, businesses have now started repurposing their building mixed-use facilities, allowing for universities to sort of get closer to the CBD, as well as creating a housing mix that allows for a level of integration. For professionals, I think what we see in Cape Town, and you see it with the big corporates like Allen Gray, Ernst & Young, and at the V&A waterfront, the mixed-use apartments in the area have now been taken up by these local professionals. So there is a model that we can plug and play within Johannesburg. From a Soweto and a township economy perspective, it's about just curating information and setting up the hubs. I think, number one, we need to curate these co-working spaces and hubs for people to firstly congregate. And once we see there's a level of congregation and demand, then it's about how we set up localized housing mixed units. And for me, as a person, I would love to live in Soweto. I would love to understand the culture. I would love to understand how we as a country just integrate effectively. But it will require me, as I said to you, Peter, it's about the human in the back end and how they feel about integration. So that educational piece is going to be critical as a country. But I believe within the next 5 to 10 years, if we get that right and drive integration effectively, it is possible.
Right. But I mean, so it's not like within the next 5 or 10 years. This is an ongoing thing. Every year, hopefully we incrementally do something. But as long as we've got what you're saying, the right idea is not simply the buildings and stuff and the businesses, it's also making sure that people can mix and enjoy themselves, and especially as we go forward. I must say, I noticed that when you look at the new airports that are built and they have wonderful spaces for people to walk around, I think in Hong Kong and in Turkey, they built these airports where, in fact, the airport itself has got a place for people to mix and enjoy themselves and have trees and all the rest of it. Very fancy stuff. I'm also very interested in how you see the transport. Let me first go to Maurits. But if you'd think for me, Clint, about the transport and about 5G and about how that's going to change us and about 3D printing, those kind of new scientific things, and IR as well. Okay. Now let's go to Maurits. Thank you very much. That was so fascinating and so interesting, and just changed my whole thinking from thinking like a science fiction novel. This is going to be a smart city. What you're taking me is saying, no, 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 we're moving there day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year. We've got to get to a point. Thank you very much. Right, Maurits, let me introduce Maurits. He's an experienced professional with extensive knowledge of green energy. I love green energy. I love green hydrogen. I just hope South Africa really moves with green hydrogen. For over 15 years, he's a leader in the renewable energy sector with green habitat energy and turnkey solar energy solutions. He's known for the first 200 houses to be powered using alternative energy, the N2 Gateway project in Delft, in Cape Town, for Mystec solar installation, the Union Tiles Group and Rectron national solar rollouts, and solar installation for First Life Hospital. His dynamic solution-based approach provides the possibility of high-end consumers to reduce their grid usage, and Maurits is the CEO of Turnkey Solar Solution. Right, Maurits, tell us about this new future we're going to have where energy is going to be free and nobody's ever heard of a blackout. Right?
Thank you very much, Peter. I think, Clint, if I can just add what you were saying is that I agree 100% with your approach. And what I found working with, for argument's sake, with the N2 Gateway project throughout the years, that started in 2007, 2008, when Dion Sisulu was still Minister of Housing, trying to look at, they're building a new housing development. They're giving the community new housing, but it doesn't help you give the community housing, but there's no infrastructure, there's no water, there's no electricity. So even if they've got current housing and it's not up to standards, you can't indirectly force them to a new development if you can't give them the similar type of infrastructure which they already got available. It's not a perfect infrastructure, but at least they got a form of power, they got a form of water. Now you're taking them, yes, to a new development, there's new housing, but there's no water, there's no electricity. That was a very interesting project I got involved in to be able to understand the community and the view of the community in this type of projects. And that was very clear to me that the community alone doesn't just want housing anymore. The community wants a proper environment where they can live and thrive. They don't just want a roof over their head anymore. They want electricity, and they quickly realize that any beginning from a business, from a start, wherever you want to go into the future, one of the big driving points, and it's not just me being in renewable energy, is having access to power. And secondly, having potable water to drink. If you don't have those two factors, you won't be able to get a successful project off the ground. So some of the projects we've been involved in is we're actually busy with 3 smart cities. One is the Durban Metropolitan project we're currently involved in, the Lanseria project, and also the Mooikloof megacity. The Mooikloof megacity is 20% complete already, just for intersake. So they're moving in a very vast pace to be able to get this megacity off the ground. But one of the big challenges that we keep on finding by building these type of megacities is the lack of infrastructure. So they're getting the business module right, for argument's sake, like Savannah Country Estate, whereby you've got student accommodation, you've got sectional title, you've got full title stands. So you've got a mix of different individuals living in the same estate. But the limitation for the success of the estate is the availability of potable water or electricity. Just to give you an idea, when they broke ground on this specific development 2-3 years ago, and they started picking up pace, at mid last year, they started running out of electricity. So they had a certain amount of power available from council, but they've reached their demand. So now the entire development came to complete standstill because they don't have efficient power to be able to drive the necessary infrastructure needed to be able to carry on with the project. So where I see one of the biggest bottlenecks is going to be going forward, building these mega cities, is the type of infrastructure you're going to need to be able to power the infrastructure around the smart cities. What we've done on a smaller scale, and which I think we've got right up to a certain extent, is building smart estates, whereby you can build a smart estate in an environment where you even got antelopes running around, you've got a small clinic on the ground. So you can take a small golf cart and you can drive around in the estate. You don't have to drive around with a car. You can take a walk with your dogs. You can go sit in a park. You can go sit at a dam. You could dam where you actually can go fishing. So you bring the entire environment to your estate, and the estate is a complete ecosystem. And then what we do is we take it a step further, is to say, now that's possible to ring fence. You can ring fence this type of estate, because we're not talking about a mega city where you have to build massive infrastructure, 50,000 houses. You've got a estate that consists of 200, 300, 400 houses. That's easy to ring fence, put infrastructure in place, build a mini grid, and you can give it off the ground. So my personal opinion is that I think we need to break it up in smaller chunks. And that's just my personal opinion. The big developers hate it when I say it, but I said, you know, if you look at the Lancero project, they envisage it's going to be finished in 25 years' time. You know, a lot can happen in 25 years' time, and look at what's happening just on the cost of electricity from Eskom's side. You know, NASA put in an application for 50%. For argument's sake, they get 20%. 20% times over a 25-year period, is a business model still going to make sense to be able to purchase in that estate? So I would rather suggest smaller type of environments, and that's what we find in COVID. And I think COVID was the wake-up call to realize what we as people actually need. We as people need to interact with people. We want to interact with people. We want to go to restaurants where you actually can bump into someone, have a conversation. You don't want to be office bound. So thinking being office bound solves a lot of issues, it doesn't. I thought firstly it was a blessing in disguise because you can have more meetings, more frequent meetings, but the human interaction portion lacks a lot. You want to be able to sit around the table, you need to be able to interact with people. But we've got a long way since COVID. Just happened a couple of years ago. If we just look at the internet, just for argument's sake, we do also a lot of estate development. The fastest internet we could get at that moment in time, that was 5-6 years ago, was 5 megabytes per second. The average internet speed we got in our estates now is over 200 megabytes per second. We're running the speed of first world countries. So there's a lot of technologies that's starting to catch up, and the levelized cost of renewables are coming down versus the Eskom increase. So when you start looking at the average return of investment to include renewables, you're far under 5 years. So now it's starting interested to say that we can take a complete different holistic approach. We can start getting these estates off the ground much sooner. Reason being is we can put our own infrastructure in place, and it's modular. We don't need to go build the Eskom power station that's going to provide 80 megawatt of power, but it's going to take 20 years to build. No, you can start the installation for solar installation tomorrow morning and just start expanding through it. A good example that we've been involved in is in the Northern Cape. I've got a big passion for the Northern Cape and the people that reside in the Northern Cape, and we've been working very closely with one of the towns called Hartswater. Now, what Hartswater did just before COVID, they got a letter from the municipality that said, you know, we're going to have a massive problem going into COVID. We won't be able to sustain the infrastructure, and we're going to have to implement block out tariffs. Now, what it meant for Hartswater, it's not load shedding for 2 to 3 hours, is you're going to have a schedule per month, and you're going to have X amount of hours available per day over a month. That's it. So what they did was very quickly is they got the entire community together to say, okay, let's look at the industry. Because a lot of people forget Hartswater actually got industry. There is factories, there is shopping centers. The Choppies franchise, one of the biggest Choppies centers, started in Hartswater itself. And that supplied quite a lot of food for the community. So you can't sit without electricity for 8 to 9 hours for Choppies. So you need to look at a sustainable business model. So what the community decided to do is to put an actual list together of the entire industry, and they identified one individual that literally climbed in his bakkie and every day drive through the town with his meter, look at what's the base load, quickly run into the spaza shop and say, Mr. John, can you just quickly put off your fryers just for 10 minutes, put off your fryers, phone the other neighbor, you can quickly put on your machines, you can carry on with their work. So what they quickly did was they created their own base load management, something that Eskom can't get right to date. They quickly, as a town, working together as a community of various mixed races to be able to make it work. So there is workable business modules if people are willing to work together. And we've seen this business modules take place just in a smaller scale, but I believe it's economy of scale. So if you can get it right on that scale, it's just a modular approach from there going forward.
Well, that's fascinating. So you're looking at kind of modular places, but it does sound to me a little bit like this is more for the wealthy than for poor people. I mean, what do we do about poor people and the unemployed, of whom we have too many?
No, it's a good question. If we take, for argument's sake, that's why I've mentioned before Savannah Country Estate. The Savannah Country Estate is a mixed estate. So inside the same estate, you've got student accommodations. So you've got your average student living there. You've got sectional titles, so stacking complexes for certain market value. And you've got full title stats. So you can build a 20 million rand house, or you can build a 800,000 rand flat. So that gives the opportunity for anybody from different income groups to be able to live in the same estate and have the same availabilities of a clubhouse and a swimming pool and whatever the case might be. And that's what I see that's transpiring more and more. Just to add what Clint was saying with the dynamics in Johannesburg, we've been working together with a development group that is buying all the old high-rise building in the south of Johannesburg. They're revamping it into student accommodation. And a lot of these students don't have housing currently. So what they've done is they take a 5-6-story high-rise building, they revamp it, and then revamp it in such a way that they've got 200 proper equipped rooms with TVs, with DSTV. For the first time, they've got kettles, they've got fridges, bar fridges, they've got printers, they've got internet, and that's what they've been doing now for the past 5 to 10 years. So there's a lot of dynamics running behind the scenes, which I think a lot of people are not aware of, but there is successful projects that are being implemented that is, from a cost perspective, fits different income streams, can benefit from it.
Maurits, I want to ask you, I mean, I've never heard of Mooikloof. Where is Mooikloof? I don't even know which province it's in.
Yeah, Mooikloof is in Gauteng. To give you a quick example where Mooikloof is situated, if you take Menlyn Shopping Centre, let's take a big Menlyn Shopping Centre, you're coming from Johannesburg, so you're coming from the N1, and you take Garsfontein turnoff, so that will take you to Menlyn Shopping Centre. Right. So if you take then the turn off the N1 and you just carry on straight, eventually you'll get to Mooikloof on your left-hand side. So Mooikloof has actually been sitting there for the past 15 years, being developed, and Baldwin is developing now over 50,000 units there, just for interstate.
I mean, if I look at that whole waterfall estate, the huge thing, that's almost like the beginnings of a smart city. It is. But there are not many places there where people mix. They all seem to stay in their own little houses.
Correct. You know, they went as far, and I thought it's never going to work, and it worked. You know, the Blades, a lot of people are not aware of it. In Pretoria, they built this estate called the Blades. So they build their own beachfront. So you've got a house you can buy on a beachfront in Pretoria. Believe it or not. So that's how far we're going down the line of a smart city. So you've got an integrated townhouse complex, and you can walk outside of your complex on a beachfront. So that's how far they've gone, making the business modules work, which I think is quite phenomenal.
Right. I'd like to hear a little bit about the sort of 5G and the sort of the new stuff, but also about crime, if you think about that for a moment for me, because crime is like one of the really big off-putting things about South Africa for investors. I just want to share with you that a couple of years ago, there was an architect who gave a lecture at, I think it was in Davos in Switzerland, and he developed a stadium. So they asked him in South Korea to develop a stadium, for a sports stadium, essentially, right? And instead of making it round, he made it almost in the shape of a dragon. So if you can imagine a dragon head and then going around and then a long dragon tail, this was the stadium. So the head part, he opened up like one fifth of the stadium, is a gap. There's not actually stadium. And that gap you look into if you're sitting in the town hall, in the town complex. So it's not in a very big city, but from the city's complex, you look into the stadium so you can actually see the game that's being played. But in order to go into it, you have to go through the turnstiles, right? And then, I mean, it was amazing because he said the problem he had was that a river ran right where he wanted to build it. So he made the river go in a different place. He said he made the river go around the stadium. And the Dragon's Tail, which is all part of the same stadium building, contains the headquarters for all the different sports in South Korea. So you have all these headquarters for the sports, and then you have this round stadium that's almost incomplete because it's got this gap. So that the townspeople, some of whom can't afford the tickets for the stadium or whatever, they can still watch the game, or they can sit and be having a beer or a cup of coffee, and they can look into the stadium. It was just so wonderful. And it speaks very much to what you and Clint are saying about getting people involved, instead of just seeing the stadium as a round thing where nobody else can sort of go in unless they paid their money. You incorporate it into the city. So, I mean, to me, that was like a smart thing to do for a city. All right, Clint, let's get back to you. You've heard what Moritz has said. What do you feel about about doing it in sort of small parcels, as it were?
I think I agree with Moritz. The reality is we will be able to unlock it effectively, and then later on, because we're building the infrastructure in such a way that will allow for the Internet of Things to plug in on top. And I think once we have the infrastructure effectively set up, we'll just plug the Internet of Things on there and then activate the solutions from a sort of IA perspective or AI perspective, and be able to really drive the level of innovation within that space. So then it's about setting up effective marketplaces, setting up effective connective hubs, setting up the logistics and sort of transport networks within that. But I think coming back to your question around crime and transport, I think transport is something that we need to slowly phase out. It's a personal belief of mine. And the reason for that is carbon emissions are way too high. And I think there's certain places we can cycle to. We can have incentives around. In Cape Town, the cycle lanes are really good, but I think also from a aspirational narrative, we're still selling cars as a "you've made it in life" narrative. So imagine we reposition the messaging about cycling and e-bikes and that sort of things, and say, if you have an e-bike, you're contributing X, Y, and Z, to the greater environment. And I think it's about the messaging, and the reality is big corporates will never change the messaging unless they invest in these new products. So you'll consistently see we'll see pollution on the rise, because how's about everyone just stops polluting? The reality is the negative spin-off to their business model is they will be affected heavily when they think sustainably. So yes, there's regulations around it. There's sort of narratives driving the change, but I think it's about allowing corporate to see their impact. And I think with the new ESG and reporting styles can hold them accountable. And once we expose them, they're going to have to change their methodologies and processes. You said another question you mentioned was around crime. I think, Peter, it's important to understand in South Africa, we struggle to track the criminal. We struggle to find the actual criminal, right? We know the crime happened, but we don't know who did it, And I think effective camera monitoring systems and surveillance is key, because we can place people at certain times and places so we can align. So from a vigilance perspective and a surveillance perspective, we can create that level of you being watched, behave yourself. So it's almost like you reinstill a model code back into people's behavior because they know they're being watched. And that's the thing in South Africa. When people aren't being watched, that's when the thing happens. That's when all the crime and the things happen. However, if they know there's cameras, there's a monitoring system in the space, the behavior will change. And right. We see it in the UK, right? We see it in the UK. We had a similar solution in Cape Town called Shot Spotter. So what they found in sort of on the Cape Flats, where there was a lot of gang violence, they would have these pillars that would be able to ping gunshots. So when a gunshot goes off, it pings, there's a level of surveillance. And when police come, they already have the intel in terms of the shot, 20 shots are fired, the guy's wearing a black top. That's the direction it was in. So it then alleviated sort of trying to pinpoint the criminal. So effectively, I think a lot more surveillance would allow for society to regulate their behavior effectively. And yes, we know, and we say Big Brother's watching, but the reality is there's so many moving parts that we need to create a socially secured system for normal and average South Africans that we can feel safe. And that ties into this whole narrative around Women's Month, gender-based violence, ensuring that people are effectively safe.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, in ethics, obviously everybody worries about your own personal, not your own personal safety, but the rights to being yourself and as you say, the Big Brother thing. But I'm with you. I'm very happy that they surveilled everything. I mean, I'd be happy to have a camera looking into my bedroom, frankly. I don't mind.
We are doing that. Like if you think of your cell phone, we're talking about this conversation later today. My phone's next to me. Ethics will come up. Smart cities will come up on my feed. We are being listened to. Why are we not understanding that that's a reality?
Exactly.
And that happens all the time.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think we need to accept it.
Money off the data. Businesses are selling on the data to marketing as a marketing solution, and then you are then tempted to buy these products. Imagine government uses this to actually create the safest space for everyone.
Yeah, I think our safety is going to become more of a major issue. It's already a big issue in South Africa. Could I ask you, Clint, just to look up Africa a bit, because this industrial Indaba kind of is looking at not just South Africa, and all three of us are very South Africa focused and big city focused. Well, I suppose we need to be, because that's what we're talking about. But as our man that's done this development economics, what do you feel about the rest of Africa? How are we doing there? How are smart cities going to be happening there? I mean, I don't see it in Nairobi very much, or in Lagos, frankly, but maybe you know more than I do.
I think maybe not the smart city concept, because African people like to live a different lifestyle. I think the level of tech adoption for Africa is around how do we live and support ourselves effectively. If you look at countries like Kenya, Nigeria, around their financial systems, heavily activated financial systems. The farmer who's on the farm the morning on his MS-DOS phone, the normal SMS old type of phones, can log into M-Pesa, get the market prices, know exactly when he goes to market what to sell his goods at. So what Africa has done effectively is they understand the economics. They understand that they have a certain level of infrastructure. They love the fact that they can maintain a rural narrative as well. So they love farming, they love creating. And now what they're doing is they're plugging on certain technological solutions to create access. So there's a big drive for financial inclusion in Africa. And that financial inclusion will allow for us to understand the banked, the unbanked. How do we get more people to partake in economic activity? We have in Nigeria, we have loans that people get at zero interest to stimulate economic growth. And also the culture is very different, where it's more that a loan will not be used for consumption. A loan will be used to start developing a product and or service and or offering to know there's going to be a return on that level of investment. So it's about the ideologies in Africa. And I think smart cities might never work in Africa, but I think sustainable cities will work in Africa. You know, more eco-friendly cities will work in Africa, because we want to preserve the landmass. We want to preserve the natural habitat of animals, of the plant life, you know, that really helps the world. And I think if the world realizes that Africa is saving them from a carbon emissions perspective, because the amount of trees and all the green in Africa allows for the West to populate, to pollute. And that's why you see a lot of Western countries now are investing in sort of soil revitalization projects in Africa, because they realize Africa ultimately is a massive breadbasket, but also an environmental hub that can alleviate our carbon emissions across the globe.
So our smart cities are going to have lots of trees. That's what you're saying, right?
Yes, it should, which is very important. You should have that green narrative.
Well, Johannesburg is supposed to be the biggest urban forest in the world, isn't it? And when originally, I mean, Johannesburg, there were very few trees. It was just felt with the odd little scrub tree here and there. So we've created a bit of a smart city in Joburg. It's been carbon smart, but not because we were thinking of that, just because we were thinking of the environment, of a pleasant place to live.
Yeah.
Okay, Moritz, can I get your views on crime and how we're going to deal with that? And also on the rest of Africa, how you see that going? I mean, I can understand why you like the Northern Cape. It's because it's got sunshine all the time. And for solar panel people, the Northern Cape is like the best place in the entire world. But tell me about the rest of Africa.
Well, Peter, I think I'll quickly start with the crime side, and then I'll switch over up in Africa. You know, the crime side, you know, just to give you some insight, you know, in what current state we are. And I think COVID was also a big driver behind poverty and just taking it to the next level, and the looting that happened in KZN as well. So setting a lot of projects back. But what I think it's the big problem that we don't understand is that there's a lot of other things that get affected through the crime is happening in South Africa. We're working very closely with Sunroll, just for interstate, and they've got a massive problem with the toll gates. Now, just to give you an idea, the problem they've been challenged with for the past 5 to 6 years is that they keep on stealing the main infrastructure close to the toll gate. So we're not talking about the generator infrastructure or the lighting infrastructure or the tolling machining infrastructure, the actual cabling that leads up to the actual toll gate itself. So a kilometer, 2 kilometers down the line, they'll rip out the cable, and that affects that entire area, including that toll gate. So they've been going back and forth, looking at various solutions to be able to say, how are we going to address that? And looking at maybe creating a more sustainable module. And they've been trying to implement it throughout the years, and they can't get a workable business module because it keeps on happening. It's the same that's happening in Pretoria East. One of the main transformers in Pretoria East that feeds Woodland Shopping Centre, Parkview Shopping Centre, and Pretoria East Hospital is called the Mooikulif transformer. They steal the cabling infrastructure at least once a month. That's the average. So the private sector have jumped in before. So when the power goes off and everybody quickly realized on the groups, so we got an entire network that it's not load shedding, they quickly jump in, investigate, and realize the cable has been stolen again. And we went as far as private companies to invest just to go install a cable again. So these guys are so vigilant. So even if you've got tracking systems in the cabling, even if you've got cameras, they still get it right to be able to steal the cabling. So what we've done is, or what we found is that we make the area smaller. So for argument's sake, at the toll gates, we install the solar panels on top of the actual toll gate. So now it's much more difficult to be able to access it. We integrate the main distribution underneath the actual roof. So if you want to get to a power cable, you're going to have to climb up that toll gate pillar and be able to get to it. So we try to make it as complex as possible to be able to access the technology and yet again ring fence it. So you create a mini grid. So you tie yourself off the network with all the cabling infrastructure that can be stolen, and you create your own small mini grid. So it's much easier to contain, much easier to manage, and much easier to replace something if something gets stolen. So that's been our view or our approach throughout the years.
So that's compartmentalizing, right? Exactly like you want to do with living. You're doing the same with crime. You compartmentalize.
It's the same because they steal a main cable to a transformer. They blow up an entire transformer room. It takes a month to build a new transformer. They steal, for argument's sake, one battery or one inverter. It's going to take a technician 10 minutes to replace. So when you start looking at that infrastructure, it's completely different dynamics around it. If we look at Africa, and I agree with Clint going, with the view of the African continent, they want a much more laid back, relaxed type of living environment. They want to have the type of luxury which international markets love, coming to the Kruger National Park. That's what they want to experience, going to Kenya, going up in Africa. And they don't want to necessarily want to walk into a massive smart city. They want to have that type of, Kruger environment. But you can take it a step further. We've worked with small SMEs throughout the years up in Africa, for even in countries in the Congo. In the south of Brazzaville, we built a small industrial park, which we do local manufacturing. We've got our own airstrip there, so we can land, we can import certain products in which we locally manufacture in Brazzaville, and we put our own infrastructure in place. So we've ring-fenced a small industrial park. We got some of the local employers involved, and we create some form of industry. And that's what we've done in Zambia, Ivory Coast, and Mali as well. But yet again, on a smaller scale, because of the infrastructure allow you only to invest in such a size project. But I think you can ring fence a lot of these small projects and get a lot of these smaller projects off the ground up in Africa.
Okay, thanks. Clint, could I ask you, what do you, if you look at where we're going to be in, let's say, 10 and 20 years' time, do you think we're going to be kind of well advanced into having a smarter cities?
So I think, as Madhu said now, the biggest plus for us as South Africa is we are activating it effectively over time. So I do believe once we activate it, once we drive better builds, inclusivity, a lot of diversity, I believe in the next 5 to 10 years we'll definitely be on par. But it's dependent on how we implement. And again, as Madhu just said, he's working with SMMEs within the sector to develop. So it's very important that we do the sub-base effectively. We have the right supplies, the right products to cater for the need. Because now we're curating this demand effectively, we're curating that, but we're going to have a supply effectively. So if we get the supply side right, and that business element of how these businesses actually do the work and how they integrate the smart cities, it will work. I had a conversation with someone the other day, and they said they went to this industrial park, they went to this, they had a new solar implementation project, but when it was load shedding, there was no backup power. So again, I think there's a lot of people that's going to jump on the train, but it's effectively understanding that the solutions need to work. It's no use anyone having solar or the initiatives, but it's important that it works when we need it to work. And I think the concept of the modular approach is really great. I think the modular structures is going to probably be the best for South Africa, because as we do the modulars, tried and tested methods, these developments are successful, they work well, people are happy. And once you curate that and then do a spin, and then later on, it just all integrates, because I think over time, maybe thinking in Johannesburg, there's a lot of more distance between places. Over time, I think modular processes will just plug in next to, and that will then form a smart community, smart hubs. And I think that then ultimately will be our smart city. We might not have that massive tech solution that you thought of, Peter, but I think we will have all the functionality that we require from an African perspective and South Africa. And that will also be a unique smart city. It won't be a Eurocentric model, it will be our African smart city. And then I think that's what I see happening in the future.
Will we have lots of drones flying in the air?
I don't know. I don't know, but maybe Maritz can tell us about drones. But I definitely think there's going to be a lot of information. It's going to also be important that we unplug and create spaces where we're not driven and consumed by tech. What we see a lot of people doing now over the last couple of years is going to the most remote places to escape, because they're constantly plugged in. So we need to ensure that human in the back end that seeks the nature, seeks the depth. A lot of people are hiking, a lot of people are climbing mountains, people are going away, they often never want to return. But the reality is technology is great, but we need to be able to control it.
Yeah, bird watching is the sort of one of the fastest growing sports, if you call it a sport. I mean, the Americans spend more on bird watching than they do on golf, which is really good news, I think. You know, I was in Kigali in Rwanda, and I mean, they have these drones, and it's amazing what they do. So these drones, they sort of fire off on an incline, almost like with a rubber band, and they go up and they fly electrically, and they drop blood.
Yeah.
And they drop blood to all the different hospitals. And I mean, the doctor, they said to me, you know, we used to watch patients die, especially pregnant women. They start bleeding and we need the blood. It takes 3 days to get blood here. Now it takes 15 minutes on my cell phone. He said, I just go on my cell phone and I say, I need 4 pints of this blood. It gets loaded onto these things and it gets dropped. As it comes over, it comes down to 50 meters high, drops the blood and flies back again, this drone. So they've closed all the blood banks at all the hospitals, saved all of that instead of having to have electricity for all the fridges, and they all get it from a single source in Kigali.
Can I also say that that was an SMME that came up with that idea? So
Yeah.
I was actually following the story. I was watching the videos online on YouTube. It was so amazing that, and that's what technology needs to do, Peter. It needs to aid in the human development, aid in our social problems. It is so simple, right? I can sit here, I can shoot this drone, boom, straight to Barrett with all the blood, and I'm like, that's really interesting.
It is fantastic. But you know what the next thing is that the drones are going to take? I mean, I don't think you'd ever guess.
No, you need to tell me, Peter.
Bull semen. Because they need to upgrade their herds, according to the president, and therefore they need to get the semen there, and semen doesn't last very long, so they need to get the bull semen from wherever the bulls make it to the herds out in the rural areas, so that they can upgrade the herds. So they get those really fancy bulls, and they impregnate the females out in the remote hills. I mean, it's just magic. I love it. And that's smart, but I mean, it's not exactly a smart city. But I mean, I love this idea of developing the smart city in little pockets all over. So it's not like a big, as you say, it's not like what I had an idea when we started this today. I had an idea of, you're going to describe this wonderful smart city with electric cars and electric everything, electric bikes. But in fact, it's little pockets. Maurits, what can you add for us?
Peter, I agree. The thing, if you look at from a holistic perspective, futuristic city, flying cars, electric bikes, I think we're systematically getting there. Something I've seen in the Netherlands that works very well, which I think can be just a basis or a starting point to manage a bit the flow of logistics inside of a state, is that the way they build the estate is the houses don't have garages. You need to park your car outside of the estate, or you walk to your house, or you've got a bicycle to ride to your house. But now it alleviates two aspects. It's not people driving up and down the estate continuously and have to patrol the children, because now you've got children as active and playing in the estate. So now you've got two sections that you're managing. You don't have cars racing up and down the estate, and you've got the emissions control of cars driving up and down. So there's small things that you can do, which I feel you can implement in the estates without going too far to make it too futuristic, just by looking at a current environment of the estate and what can be done inside of the estate environment. What we've recently done for a golf course is they've got over 200 golf carts. We integrated solar into the golf carts. Because what we've realized when we've done a study, there's always only 20 available at any given time. I said, but you've got 200, why is it only 20? Because we need to plug them in and charge them using the grid. So we implemented solar panels and integrated it into the actual golf cart. So while they're driving off the golf cart gets charged. So they don't need access to the grid. So there's a lot of SMEs out there, very smart ideas, which you quickly can implement and can quickly make a vast difference. And so systematically you can start expanding it inside of this type of environments, I believe.
Right, Maurits, now you're a fundi on renewable energy. Tell me about green hydrogen, which is my favorite topic at the moment.
Well, I've got different beliefs when it comes to different renewable energies, my personal opinion. I think if we look at South Africa, and there's a panel discussion I had a couple of days ago, I don't think there's going to be one specific technology that's going to stand out for the next 5, 10, 20 years, to be honest. That's my personal opinion. And the reason being is that if you look at South Africa and South Africa's growth, just for example, is we're never going to catch up with the demand. So you're going to need to be able to have a diversified portfolio of different type of renewable products. from hydrogen, from solar panels, from wind, from waste to energy plants to biogas. And I hate saying it, but maybe start looking at nuclear. Just due to the vast expansion of the South African environment. I love using the example Pretoria because I grew up in Pretoria. Menin Shopping Center turned 40 last year. So 40 years ago, if you go look on Google, there was nothing. So everything that you see, all the schools, all the shopping centers, all the estates, golf estates, Roothill, Silver Lake, you name it, 40 years ago, there was nothing. The closest shopping center was Sunnyside. That's a good 20-meter drive. So there's a lot that's happening, and there's a lot of estates coming online, and we can't keep up with the demand. Just for interest's sake, Anglo-American announced, and I'm not sure if you're aware of it, breaking ground in Petersburg with the largest platinum mine in the world. The amount of electricity that they require is 800 megawatts. So you can quickly do the calculation of how many Eskom power stations they need. And that's one of the big drivers why the president took away the red tape last year, because they were sitting together with the Anglos and a lot of the other mines and said, what is your vision for the next 5 to 10 years? What is the infrastructure needed and how much power do you need? You know, the amount of power they need is equivalent to a smart city, but the amount of jobs they can create throughout that environment is, do you want to invest in a smart city or do you want to invest in a mine? But the smart city automatically will follow because the mine is going to create the X amount of jobs. But to build 800 megawatts of power is going to take 20 years. So you're going to need to have from hydrogen to wind to biogas to waste to energy. You're going to have a mix of renewables to be able to make this work. So that will be interesting to see in the next 4 to 5 years what specific renewable energy product or solution is actually going to be the spearhead of the future going forward. That's just my personal opinion.
You're a solar man, so are solar panels getting better and the batteries to store the power getting better? Are we moving forwards? Because I mean, in the various sort of energy endeavors that I've attended, the amount of energy we get from a solar panel seems to have improved over the years. And are we still improving?
Yes, sir. So to put that quickly in context, if we just, when the boom basically started in 2008, when we experienced the first load shedding, from 2008 to now 2022, the levelized cost of solar came down by 50 to 40%. Simultaneously, what happened is the biggest solar panel you could get in 2008 is 150 watt. The size you can get now 650 watt.
Wow.
For more or less the same size panel, slightly bigger, but you've got now from 150 to 650, and the efficiency's also gone up. The same with the battery technology. We used to use just your straightforward lithium batteries or your lead acid batteries. But now what happened is your 3rd and 4th generation of lithium batteries, and the pricing have come down significantly. Where the starting pricing was around 50,000 Rand for 5 kilowatt battery. Now you're at 20,000 Rand. That's almost half the price. So the levelized cost is coming down, and systematically, you've got this Eskom increases just going from 80% to 13%, now 20% to maybe 50%. But parallel to that, there's a lot of incentive. There's a lot of driving from government. You've got SARS that implemented Section 12B tax incentive a couple of years ago. So for a business in South Africa, if you install solar, you can write off the asset 100% in the first year. So if you spend R1 million, you can write off additional 280,000 Rand. You've got a manufacturing competitive advancement program for tourism. Due to COVID, the IDC will contribute up to R1 million for the implementation of a solar solution if you own a lodge. So there's a lot happening from the industry side. Levelized costs have come down, and you've got grants and tax incentives from government. So if you package everything together, just for interest sake, your average return of investment now for a solar solution, you're looking at 3 years with a product that's going to last you 10 years plus. So that's why a lot of the international companies is now reinvesting into South Africa due to the levelized cost that came down. We've got a vast demand. The only big problem that we're sitting now with is the conflict in Europe. because of the demand that went up now in Europe, we've got a shortage in South Africa of supply. So that's just from a logistics side, we need to counter again and start really looking at the business model to say that we seriously need to start looking at local content again. We need to visit the business modules. We've been doing it for the past years, and we need to get to common grounds because the international markets, the demand's going to be there for the next 5 to 10 years. It wasn't there a year ago. So what are we going to do about it? And then the only way we're going to be able to close that gap is we need to look at more local contribution, look at solar PV manufacturing plants, looking at building battery manufacturing facilities and start putting our own technologies in place. Else we're going to definitely be far behind the curve, trying to keep up with the European market.
Sorry, manufacturing our own solar panels. Is that an extremely difficult thing? Or is it just that the labor costs are much lower?
That's our biggest problem, but believe it or not, that's actually a sad story, is that in 2010 in Pinetown, we built one of the first state-of-the-art solar PV manufacturing plants called Art Solar. It's still sitting there. But due to the cost associated with the global Chinese offtake market, you can't compete with the cost. So for argument's sake, you 200-300 rand per panel more expensive, you would say, well, for local content, 200 to 300 rand, that's not a big difference. But the type of solar plants we currently building in South Africa, building 50, 80 megawatt, now you start talking about 500 million panels. At 200-300 rand a panel more expensive, it breaks the entire business case. So you need to start looking at clever tax incentives or even start putting in import duty tax on Chinese products. People hate it when I say that, but you're going to have to look at this type of incentive driving it. If you're not going to have this incentive driving it, you're never going to get it off the ground. And a very good example was when we started the solar water heating rollout in South Africa. That was very successful. There was a lot of companies that opened overnight, small SMEs companies. We opened over 80 franchises, trained over 15,000 plumbers over a 2-year duration. Eskom came to the party and they put a rebate scheme together. But it was critical, the rebate scheme from Eskom. As soon as that rebate scheme stopped, we couldn't compete with the international market. So the South Africa environment, unfortunately, is still of the opinion you've got a South African branded product, South African approved, South African standard stamp on it, and you've got a Chinese product at half the price. Which one are you going to buy? You're still going to buy the Chinese product. And I think one of the biggest examples now is the car industry. Is that, I keep on laughing when people sit and argue which cars they want to buy. I come from a very Dutch family, if I may say that, and they only believe in Toyota. I promise you, no one in my family drives Toyotas anymore. They're not willing to pay the price for that. They feel Hyundai is a much better option and at a much better price, and it gives you a much better quality product. That's their belief. So you've got a very old school mentality, which you changed in a 2-year time period, which for me was very interesting. So that's just a couple of interesting facts which I've seen as happening in the industry, is that there is so many products and solutions available, but the local content is going to define the industry in the end of the day.
Well, you'll be pleased to know I drive a Hyundai iX35, so I also moved away from Toyota. Right? Okay. Clint, can I ask you, if you were the president or controlled South African economy or controlled the cabinet, what are the things that you would be looking for politically for them to do to enable us to move even faster in terms of the smart cities?
Difficult question. I think I'm apolitical, and I thought this was an apolitical discussion, but I think
everything is politics.
Yeah, life is politics. But I think for South African politics, it starts with the level of, and this is the discussion I was listening to Eusebius Mackay the other day, as well as DJ Spoo and Peniel. They were chatting about politics in its entirety. The conversation was around that the professional class in South Africa has failed politics. And the reason why I say that is people that are in the professional class are sitting in the back and throwing stones into the water. However, they are not taking up these political memberships and or partaking in the activities of politics to influence the thinking. So the country is effectively run by people that want to be in politics. Other people don't want to partake in politics. So I think it starts with the level of selection of the right political leadership. I think it starts there. We need, unfortunately, we need a more diverse and younger level of leadership in South Africa. I think it is not logical that our leaders should be in ages over 60, because then to run the country effectively, I think the tech and the information hub and what's happening in the world is the younger people are bringing that new age thinking through. So I think firstly around the political structures and the sort of the appointees being a different sort of age group would really help because of the tech and how people have adopted effectively. Gen Zs, Gen Zs, very different ideologies to the old school thinkers. That's number one. I think then from as Maria said, a lot more incentives for these IPPs in terms of local content. In my time at the Western Cape government, there was this massive drive around local content and declarations. Businesses had to say what portion is local content, but what we failed to do is actively institute those industrial hubs to cater for the demand that we know. So we gather the data, we know what is imported, what is exported, what is the percentage of steel that's local, etc., but we haven't set up the industries. So I think there needs to be a massive drive to set up those local hubs. And from a procurement perspective, we need to understand that buying local will cost more initially. But as Maria said, like with the batteries, the cost will level off over time. As you get the industries, as you build out the efficiencies, the cost will level off. So I think for me, two key drivers to activate that smart cities, again, from a supply perspective, is to set up those industrial hubs that can manufacture the products we will need. It's going to be utterly pointless if we import everything from China and wanting to build this amazing smart city in South Africa. You know, and I think that's what we must think, because that's going to drive local economic development, local spend, local business partaking in the economic opportunities that's created. And then from there, you'll see a positive spin-off, because that will translate into tangible jobs. Jobs will lead to more consumption. Consumption leads to higher economic activity. And that speaks to the greater economic growth that we seek to achieve in South Africa.
Right. I mean, you say we must change our politicians to become younger. But I mean, even on this panel, I can see that my ideas are a bit old, that I'm looking at my science fiction that I read compared to yours, where you're actually on the ground and you're doing this stuff. And I agree with you absolutely. But that wasn't what I was really asking. Is we all think we should change the politicians. What I was really asking is, what are the political tough decisions that they need to take? And you've given me some idea of those in terms of the infrastructure. Yeah. I'd like to know if we convened the smart people and the young people and said, in 10 years' time, what is it that we would like to be manufacturing? What is it that everybody will be looking for? I mean, I think, well, they'll be looking for chips, computer chips, which is a shortage of, and clearly we're going to need them for artificial intelligence. We're going to need them for those cameras of yours. We're going to need them for everything, from the bicycles to the cell phones to the fridges we are going to need chips. Why do we not set up a chip manufacturing thing? Even if it costs a couple of billion, we can get people who would invest in it, hopefully. And then we'll at least be able to have our own chips. That's one very old man's thinking. But what is it that we will need in 10 years' time that we can start setting up now to enable these smart cities to operate? I'll leave you to think. I'll go back to Moritz.
Clint, if you don't mind, if I answer that question, I've got one or two ideas. I think in an ideal world, just for intersect, Peter, I think you'll find this quite interesting. There's a company called Access, this AXIZ, based in Midrand. They're part of Pinnacle Holdings, the Viva Holdings listed group. They Mustech Holdings, this is basically two biggest IT distributors in South Africa. Mastic is known for your Mesa and your Acer brands, but just for interest sake, they local assemble over 68 different products. Access manufacture chips. So for HP, all of your chips inside of your HP laptops is locally manufactured in South Africa.
Wow.
That plant was set up in 2009 already. Mastec, part of the group of companies that own Comstec, so all their surveillance equipment get locally manufactured in South Africa. So there's a lot of tech, believe it or not, that's getting locally manufactured as we speak. Even LED lighting, there was a big program throughout the years that been put in place through the IDC, where LED lighting, which you even buy from Boulder Warehouse, all of them gets locally manufactured. Some of them are still imported products, but there's a lot less. Most of them are local. I think from my personal opinion, and that's not coming out of the solar industry, what I think that we need to look at investing going forward, and why I say it's so critical, it's from two perspectives, is that what is my wish from the government side to unlock the entire dynamics in South Africa, that we can really pick up the speed that we need to speed up, is that they stop keeping all of their cards against their chest and start realizing they can't do this without the private sector, as simple as that. For the following reason, and Cyril Ramaphosa quickly have realized that at the end of last year, is that the demand that South Africa needs, there's no ways that they will ever be able to provide it. And that's why, yet again, I've said previously, you took away the red tape. You're more than welcome as a private company to go build a 100 megawatt solar plant. My mind is, when it comes to that, is to say that we need to look at infrastructure. What is the infrastructure realistically we're going to need for the next 10 to 20 years? Because that's going to be the bottlenecks. One of the bottlenecks is our road infrastructure. Our road infrastructure keep on completely failing. It's collapsing. And every day there's more cars on the road. And there's no more roads getting built and all roads getting fixed. It's just getting worse. So we need to start taking control and look at holistically what is the products needed, critical products to make a change, and the things that we're going to need to be able to put in place from a local manufacturing aspect as much as possible we can do in the power production space. So whatever we can manufacture, what patents are sitting there, whatever the CSR is involved in or innovation hub is actually getting these products off the ground. There's a lot of incubators sitting across South Africa. You sit with the Small Enterprise Development Agency with a lot of ideas, young entrepreneurs. UJ sitting with a lot of intelligent engineers sitting there that can get products off the ground. That's what I did at the Into Gateway project in Delft. I built the first vertical axis wind turbine in the country. To be able to get a product off the ground, to be able to show it's possible. It can be done in South Africa. The knowledge are here. We do have the manufacturing infrastructure. If we start working with the manufacturing industry to be able to actually build anything that we need. We're sitting actually with the skill set on the ground, but we're not willing to share our knowledge. So I think one of the biggest bottlenecks is that we can just cross that hurdle and just say, let's look what's currently available in South Africa. Let's look at all the manufacturing industry as a whole, and how can we cross-pollinate and support each other to get all these various products off the ground. And with a key focus to say that the starting point, yet again, for anything, if you want to build a school, if you want to build a shopping center, if you want to build a estate, if you want to build a clinic, you can't do any of the above without power. So the starting point for anything is power. So if you control power, that is your starting point for growth, in my personal opinion. So my opinion will be, if you really want to get the industry off the ground, the government must allow private developers to put their own bulk services in place, because none of the municipalities can sustain it. They don't have the money to upgrade the current infrastructure. So allow the industry to put their own services in place. They're scared of doing that because they think they're going to lose money. But if you look at the financial module, they still make money on rates and taxes. So the amount of the developments are in limp mode because they can't get it off the ground, because you as a municipality don't want to sign off on the bulk services. Give the developer the go ahead. because that automatically will create the snowball effect of getting the state off the ground. And you've got people that's building the state, people that's laying tiles, laying bricks. It automatically creates a continuous of jobs. And the bottleneck is so simple, just to give a developer the opportunity to create their own services.
So you're really saying that what you want is for both local and provincial and national governments to free up all the regulations and to be able to allow private enterprise to come in and make sure that we have the infrastructure that we need, from roads to sewerage to water to electricity. That would help us to create smarter cities in the future. It sounds to me like we're not talking about a smart city so much as smarter cities as we move forward. That's the big takeaway for me from today, is that we're looking at making our cities smarter. Am I right, Moritz?
I agree, sir. Yeah, definitely, Peter.
I agree.
Clint?
I agree 100%.
Gee, I don't usually get people agreeing with me. I must be doing something wrong. So I need some disagreement here.
No.
All right, guys. What more can you tell me? Is there anything more that we need to discuss? I think we've gone around most of the topics. I have a little list to look at. Let me just quickly see whether we're where we are. The inequality of South Africa, and in fact of Africa. How will smart cities help to address that?
I think in my initial statement, Peter, it was around the cities need to create a level of accommodation for everyone.
Right.
So,
Right.
as Marit said, there's a sort of mixed-use housing complexes will potentially be the best way to form integration. But again, it's about, why would I leave Houghton to live in your mixed-use facility? So what makes your facility more attractive and more integrated or integrative and has all the services I require? So it's understanding what people's needs are and then curating our sort of developments and housing structures to drive that level of inclusion. So that's really moving people from place to place. Initially, it happened due to financial and market activity. Now it's around people have choice in terms of where they want to go. So I think it's really allowing that city that if I want to fish and there's a dam, I can live in that specific area. If I want to play golf, there must need to be a golf course. If I want to play cricket, there needs to be a cricket facility. So it's about really curating it in a way that caters to most of the people's needs effectively.
Yeah, well, I was impressed by the fact that you say the docks is a good area in Cape Town. Everybody mixes there, and they've somehow got people, they've got that mixture pretty well right. I mean, you've got kind of entertainment there, but of course you do have the sea, which is a big thing to attract people. But you also have problems in Cape Town, and you had problems with access to the beaches in Clifton, where different groups complained about that. So I think you have to kind of have open access beaches, but perhaps private beaches as well, as you would have in Monaco, somewhere.
But I think that's fundamentally only because the social systems aren't ready for integration at times. So how do we curate the social systems in a way that allows that, with economic development, with people getting access to more income, people are going to move and move and be in different areas given the access they have. So how do we allow for people that have maybe more access and more resources to create a level of acceptance for other people?
Right.
It's very important.
I mean, you've made me think, because Johannesburg would need a place where people can all mix, right? It's got various little places, but I think we've got 1,200 parks in Johannesburg that the Parks Department looks after. But it would be great to have a central park like New York has, where we put a whole lot of parks together and where you have different recreational things happening at the same time, as opposed to just cricket or just golf or just bird watching, right? Although the cyclists are now coming to where the bird watchers are, which is irritating the bird watchers because the cyclists chase the birds. But it would be nice to have some kind of a central thing. And I think in planning for a smart city, it would be great for somebody to do what they did for New York, is to just clear one big area and say, that's going to be our big park. And that's where people are going to do things. But we don't have a river. We do have the little YXK, but we're talking a bit too much about Joburg and Cape Town. We should be talking about the whole of Africa. I mean, Durban doesn't seem to have been represented here at all. Okay. Moritz, any idea on how we deal with, or I suppose your idea is that compartmentalization of creating modular places. That's how we deal with the vast gap between the rich and the poor in this country, right?
Yeah, yes, I agree on that, definitely.
The other question here is, how do we close the gap between policy and implementation? Well, I think that is a very tough question to answer. I mean, to some extent that's politics, I think. But any ideas on that?
So I have an idea on this localized narrative, right? And it's a spin-off from last year's riots, etc., right? With a massive uproar in South Africa. But that fundamentally flows from the level of exclusion and a level of consumerism that was created by big corporates. So we'll go in and build a big shopping complex, we'll build big developments and leave, and then really market this facility and really recoup costs through people spending their money. And what I think from a policy perspective is this local economic development narrative is really critical, because what we find in that space really is saying, we want to do a massive development, right? How do we involve the local community, right? What are the community businesses around that space? What are the nodes to activate that activity? And what we see in that space now is businesses getting access to the opportunity means that they take care of these assets. They buy into the concept of Ubuntu, like we all work, play, and our sustainability comes from this facility. The biggest challenge, obviously, from an implementation perspective, is finding the relevant support and supply for the demand. So I think it's important that as we curate policy, we need to understand that we need to ensure that there's a supply to the policy. So in the case of local economic development, is how do we find localized suppliers to actually partake of these local developments? And if the suppliers partake, there's a level of economic activity, buy-in, and inclusive growth. So it's not like a big developer, like a big developer will come in and develop and leave. They now have a sustainability plan. People will then curate services for that area, but also know that from a track record perspective and as a good corporate citizen, these businesses are now investing in localized labor, local communities, and therefore, when I buy now, my thinking will be aligned to, I want to be aligned to that corporate citizen. So I think, yes, policy great, but I think also in the back end of policy, it's around creating that flow into the policy for implementation.
Yeah, and I mean, in fact, that's where integrity and trusting a business to be a good citizen comes in as well, right? Moritz, anything to add?
I'm fine, thank you.
Okay. Well, I think what I've learned from today is it's all about people, rather than buildings, and rather than the sort of science fictional things that I was hoping to hear all about, of sort of having underground tube trains and flying cars and all of those things. It's about developmental economics, as Clint was saying, and we're on a path where we incrementally moving forwards towards smart cities, and that some parts of smart cities are already there, and that when we do create them, we need to think very carefully about places where people can mix and making sure that the smart cities are people oriented. So thank you both very much indeed. I have found it fascinating. I hope you've enjoyed the afternoon. It's been wonderful meeting you both and listening to what you had to say. Thank you very much.